John Lennon was one of the greatest artists that ever lived. Though his claim to fame came with his involvement with the Beatles, it was his personal life and his solo career that gained him the most attention. From his involvement with the anti-war movement to his greatly publicized relationship with Yoko Ono, John Lennon secured his spot as one of rock's greatest artists and greatest tragedies. His death in 1980 shocked the world, and he continues to be a great influence on artists everywhere today. Throughout this speech, I will inform you about John Lennon, who he was, what he accomplished, and why he is so important to the world of music. I became a fan of John Lennon and the Beatles when I was a young child. My parents basically controlled what I listened to growing up, and the Beatles is what we listened to the most. Though I didn't start doing research on John Lennon until I was assigned this project, I've been researching the Beatles for years as my music interest grows. John Lennon was born in Liverpool, England, on October 9, 1940, during World War II. His father, Alf, left his mother, Julia, when John was just an infant. Although he remained a part of his life for a short while, he left permanently when John was just 5 years old. His mother, Julia, struggled with being a mother and eventually gave her sister, Mimi, and her husband, George, custody of John. Julia did remain in John's life and taught him how to play the piano and played him Elvis records. Sadly, Julia died when John was just 17 years old after being struck by a car driven by an off-duty police officer. This would later cause a bond to form between John and future Beatles band member Paul McCartney, whose mother died of cancer in 1956. John continued to live with his Aunt Mimi, who helped him get into the Liverpool College of Art. It is there that he met his future wife, Cynthia Powell. John hated school and became more and more interested in music. During his time at the Liverpool College of Art, he formed a band named the Quarrymen in 1957. Paul McCartney was a fan of the Quarrymen after seeing their second performance at St. Peter's Church. He met John soon thereafter and became a member of the Quarrymen. He later convinced John to let George Harrison join the band, although John was apprehensive because George was so much younger than the rest of the members. After many name changes, the band finally decided on the Beatles. John Lennon was thought to be the leader of the band. As fellow Beatle Paul McCartney was quoted, "We all looked up to John. He was older and he was very much the leader. He was the quickest wit and the smartest." Before their fame in America, the Beatles found success in Europe. The Beatles' first single, Love Me Do, reached number 17 on the British charts, and their first album, Please Please Me, reached number 1. Their record company, EMI, offered its American subsidiary, the well-known Capitol Records, to release the Beatles' record. However, they declined. After many offers, they finally released I Wanna Hold Your Hand on American radios in 1964. It is then that Beatlemania came to America and the British invasion began. Following an appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, the Beatles found international fame and began a 2-year tour. During this tour, they made movies and wrote hit songs. Lennon went on to write 2 books during this tour, In His Own Right and A Spaniard in the Works, both filled with nonsensical stories and drawings. By 1965, Lennon became distraught with the Beatles. He complained that no one could even hear them perform over all the screaming. He began to put on weight and realized that he was subconsciously seeking help and looking for a change. The change he was seeking was found after an interview with the London Evening Standard. He made a quote stating that, "Christianity will go. It will vanish and shrink. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity." While this quote went virtually unnoticed in England, many people were upset about this quote, particularly in America. Throughout the Bible Belt, people burned Beatles albums. The Ku Klux Klan even made threats on the Beatles members' lives. The Vatican was upset as well, and it took 42 years for the Pope to forgive John Lennon for his quote. In 1969, after a failed tour and struggles internally with the band split up. John Lennon left first and Paul McCartney followed. John Lennon also recorded music outside of the Beatles, first with his second wife, Yoko Ono, and then as a solo career. He recorded 2 records with Yoko Ono, Unfinished Music Volume 1 and Volume 2. And these records were experimental electronic rock, and his fans found it virtually unlistenable. His first solo album, Live Peace in Toronto, was recorded in 1969, prior to the split with the Beatles. In 1970, the Plastic Ono Band was released, and it was based on his primal therapy experiences. His most famous record, Imagine, was released in 1970. It had a message of peace and harmony. The title track, Imagine, was an anti-war anthem, and although he said he sugarcoated his message, the message was understood nonetheless. His next album, Sometime in New York City, was extremely political, and it told of his struggles to obtain a green card, his views on Britain's involvement with Northern Ireland, and other controversial social problems. He released 2 more albums with similar messages before retiring in 1975 to focus on his family life. This retirement lasted until 1980, when he released what would become his final album, Double Fantasy, which he produced with his wife, Yoko Ono. John Lennon was a troubled man, as sadly most successful artists are. He had 2 children, one with his ex-wife Cynthia, and one with his wife Yoko Ono. After suspicions of infidelity, Cynthia Lennon filed for divorce, claiming that Lennon's drug use was to blame. It was well known that the Beatles were involved in drugs after first smoking marijuana with Bob Dylan in 1964. Lennon then went on to experiment with LSD and heroin, which he describes his withdrawals in his song Cold Turkey. Lennon had a troubled relationship with their son Julian. He missed the birth of his son in 1963 while he was on tour. He then immediately went on vacation before returning home. Julian has said that he was closer with Beatles member Paul McCartney than he was with his own father. It wasn't until 1973 that Lennon made an attempt to mend the relationship with his son, although the relationship was never fully healed. In an interview before his death in 1980, John Lennon said that he knew one day he and his 17-year-old son would be close. Lennon met his second wife, Yoko Ono, while he was still married to Cynthia. They met in 1966 and remained friends until their relationship began in 1968. In November of 1968, Yoko miscarried with their first son. In 1974, however, they separated for 14 months, reconciling in 1975. It was during the split that John Lennon announced his retirement. In 1975, after their reconciliation, their son Sean was born. Because his relationship with his first son, Julian, was so terrible, he vowed to devote himself to Sean. During the late 1960s, Lennon and Yoko Ono became anti-war activists. After moving to New York City, they became friends with Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, who were also anti-war activists. Lennon performed at the Free John Sinclair concert in Michigan that year, in 1971. John Sinclair was currently serving a 10-year prison sentence for attempting to sell marijuana to an undercover officer. 3 days after the concert, Sinclair was released by the Michigan State Prison. His song, Give Peace a Chance, which he recorded with Yoko Ono in 1969, was sung by over 250,000 supporters at the Second Vietnam Moratorium Day in Washington, D.C. In 1971, President Nixon tried to have Lennon deported on the grounds that his anti-war beliefs and support for Democratic candidate George McGovern could cost him the election. In 1975, the case against Lennon was absolved, and he was given his green card. Lennon and Ono resided in New York City until he was killed in 1980. Years prior to his death, he commented that he would probably be popped off by some loony. On December 8, 1980, Lennon was shot 4 times in the back by a fan outside of his home. Just hours earlier, he had signed an autograph for that fan. His killer was later named as Mark David Chapman. There was no funeral held for Lennon, and his cremated ashes were kept by Yoko Ono. In 2002, the BBC conducted a poll in which Lennon was voted number 8 of 100 Greatest Britons. In 2002, Rolling Stone magazine ranked Lennon number 38 on the list of the 50 greatest artists of all time. In 1987, he was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, and into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1994. In 1994. John Lennon's death affected millions of people. While the Beatles led him to fame, it was on his own accord that he remained in the spotlight. As one of the most talented musicians that ever lived, he continues to inspire and is admired by many today.